everyone. Welcome to our NewCampus conference, Crossroads of Sustainability, Business and Tech. My name is Lily and I'm the head of programs at NewCampus. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Please write in the chat your name, where you are from, and what you're looking to get out of today's session. So for this conference, we have split it into two panel sessions, as well as a networking session, two networking sessions right after our first and second panel. So make sure that you get yourself camera ready for that part, as you'll be turning on your videos during the 20 minutes of speed networking session. So remember, if you took a screenshot or photo from today, please tag us on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook at NewCampus HQ. Our account details are going to be linked in the comment section right now. I'm just going to minimize your video right now. So for those who have attended our previous conferences over the past few months, welcome back. We've had some really exciting topics previously around design ethics of technology, the new virtual reality, creative destruction in a pandemic, and we're really equally excited for the engaging discussion we're going to have today around sustainability, business, innovation, and technology. So for all of our newcomers, welcome. To briefly introduce what NewCampus is, we are a modern leadership school that aims to equip a new generation of critical thinkers and learners to really navigate the challenges of the unprecedented global change ahead with the right skills, insights, and connections. So this is done in a multi-formatted, interactive way, whether that be through our 90 minutes interdisciplinary-based leadership workshops, Power Ladies Breakfast, and Power Lunches, where you learn directly from industry leaders. And it could be from our monthly conferences like the one today, where we delve into specific trends or topics from multiple angles and perspectives. So over the next 2 hours, we'll be speaking with industry and global leaders on how businesses need to become ever more sustainable, and emerging technology and innovative solutions need to be adopted. In the face of climate change, we find business, technology, and sustainability at the crossroads of saving us and the planet. So our first session today will be building back better in the circular economy. The idea of a circular economy is simple: to make better use of resources, close loops of resource management by fully recovering materials instead of wasting them, and prevent waste and pollution through better design of products and materials. The circular economy sounds great, but how might a business or organization plug themselves into the circular economy to be sustainable and yet remain profitable? So we'll really get into some lively discussions today. Without further ado, we'll start off this conference. Get comfortable. So first of all, I'm going to introduce our first moderator to kickstart this panel session. We have Laura Francois. Laura is a trained social impact strategist with over 10 years experience in the environmental and human rights space. She is the co-founder of Impact Entrepreneurship Program, The Spaceship, and has led sustainability movements in Malaysia, Singapore, and Cambodia, designing circular economy models in the garment industry and leveraging the power of the creative arts for change building. So I will now invite Laura to the stage. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
Thank you for being here today. We're really excited to have you and to have you moderate this amazing number of panels. I will now request everyone to come onto the stage as well, and I will hand it over to you.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Lily. It's so great to be here with everyone. I really can't wait to actually introduce all of you to our speakers today. I'm going to wait for them to come on screen. Here we go. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome to the panel. So Lily mentioned circular economy being something, this really simple concept, but we're gonna actually explore whether or not it is as simple as she says it is. And we're going to kind of delve deep into what that's all about. What is the circular economy? Why is it important? How does it relate to business? All that good stuff. Before we do that, I can't wait to introduce all three of you to our audience, starting with Roy here on my right. Roy Chung is the global head of sustainability solutions, in the polycarbonate business unit at Covestro, a material science company. Now, Covestro is one of the world's largest manufacturers of polycarbonate, a type of polymer widely used in many industries, including mobility, electronics, healthcare, and also construction. And so we'll be really drilling into some of the knowledge that he brings around design and products that are really innovating around the circular economy. We now have Martin Stavenhagen, sorry, I mispronounced your name, public policy researcher and co-founder, director of SD Consulting. He's a policy consultant, a researcher, an educator with more than 10 years of experience, really building capacities for the circular economy, for systems innovation, for sustainable development. He's also a certified expert in climate and renewable energy finance at the Frankfurt School of Finance and United Nations Environment Program. Welcome, Martin. We've lost Roy, but hopefully he will be back in just a moment, just in time for me to introduce our last speaker, last but not least, Hemant Chaudhary, founder and executive director at Circular Economy Alliance Australia, or CEAA. Hemant is one of Australia's leading experts in the area of sustainability and the circular economy, and he works extensively on global initiatives with the UN, with the World Bank, with international agencies. He's the founder of Circular Economy Alliance Australia, a global coalition for leadership in the circular economy. We really need that. To date, CEAA has brought together minds and hands of more than 14,000 leaders, C-level executives, mayors, and sustainability leaders around the world. So we have a panel for you, and experts is I'd say the smallest word I could use is experts, but we have much more than that. I think we have a group of folks who really speak to the experience that it takes to really build in the circular economy. So with that, Roy keeps coming and going, but we'll check in with him as he comes in. I want to roll into the topic right away. I want to start with you, Martin, because you consult businesses. You've been working in this space for quite some time now, and I want to ask you first and foremost, what are the first steps that businesses need to consider to start going circular? What does that look like?
Well, thank you so much for being here on this very exciting panel. It's really a pleasure to be discussing this really urgent and exciting topic of circular economy in these times. So what would be the first steps? I think, so the concept of circular economy actually isn't that new if you think of it. It's basically using things better, like valuing the materials and resources that you actually have, wasting less. That has been practiced for most of the time when resources weren't as readily available or supposedly readily available. So what I think is circular economy is definitely more than waste management, but I think the first thing you think of is to look at byproduct, your production you offer, and analyze where you have byproduct, where you have inefficiencies, and then go from.
We're off to a bad start. It seems like it's, at least this is not the panel on how technology is going to save the world, because at this point, technology is not helping us out too much. I'm sorry about that. We have two panelists dropped off. That's okay. I'd actually love to, so the first thing that Martin was saying was circular economy is nothing new. It's been around for a long time. I mean, can you speak to that a little bit? What does it look like now? What is a circular economy in our present day? 2020. We're in a pandemic. What does the circular economy look like?
First of all, thanks, Laura. Great to be here. And yes, I'll sort of fill in for Martin till the time he comes back. Look, I think circular economy, he was right that it's not a new thing. It's not a new phenomena. How putting value on our resources, conserving resources, was something that humanity throughout the centuries has put a lot of emphasis into. Just that in the last 50 years, there has been a strong disconnect. And that is because we have not thought through the impact of excessive resource utilization to fuel certain economic objectives. But at the same time, we have not designed proper systems to actually deal with that over extraction of resources and also then the disposal of those resources. And I always look at waste. There is no such thing as waste in a material environment. In my view, waste is basically a resource at a wrong place.
Waste is a resource at a wrong place. That's quotable. That's a quotable. That's quotable. I think that's interesting. So redefining this concept of waste. I'll throw this to you to dig a bit deeper on that. Can all industries go circular?
Absolutely.
Is that possible?
Absolutely possible. It is perfectly possible. There are so many examples. The science is there, technology is there. I think what we are still struggling is that we don't have a very conducive ecosystem or environment to drive that change, and that has to start. In fact, the pandemic could be a really good instigator to reevaluate and revalue what matters to us and how we want to move forward.
So Hemant, one of the things that you have been doing and working on to make the environment conducive for a more circular economy and for more companies and industries to take part is around collaboration. Why is collaboration necessary? What does that look like? Do you have any great examples for where collaboration has actually enabled the circular economy to be successful?
Sure.
Roy, can you hear me?
In fact, circular economy demands collaboration because we just cannot do it all alone. Imagine that if you are a corporate, say, for example, someone like, say, Amazon, you will have to involve your entire value chain, your designers, manufacturers, distributors, subcontractors into basically driving circular economy objectives. At the same time, you are not isolated from the world. You also have to partner with the community and the government. I'll give an example. I was in conversation with the chief sustainability officer of one of the large, cosmetics and a group that manufactures, shampoos, conditioners, cosmetic products, toothpaste, you name it. And they have committed that by 2025, all their packaging be fully recyclable. So they are spending millions and millions of dollars to make their packaging fully recyclable. But he shared a frustration that whilst they are putting in this effort, there is a total disconnect with the community, and they have very little influence on the systems out there that collect and recycle and reprocess this packaging. So despite them doing their end of the bargain, I guess, still this millions and millions of tons of packaging is still going into the rivers and water bodies and into the ocean. So that's a good example of why we need to collaborate, why we need to have a more robust platform for collaboration.
Nothing lives in isolation, right? So if we think in systems, we should be able to think of the entire system coming together. Absolutely. I want to turn over to Roy. Roy, you work in the material science space. So much about the circular economy is about materials. What is the difference? Can we kind of, if I may, take the word recyclability? What is the difference between recyclability and the circular economy? We're comparing our current linear economy where we're taking resources out from the ground, we're making things, and then we're wasting it. And then we've transitioned to a recycling economy. So what is the relationship between that and where we're trying to head in, with regards to the circular economy?
Right. Can you guys hear, by the way?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Right. So I think recycling and circular economy as two concepts are often used interchangeably. So people tend to think that the only way to achieve circularity is by recycling, and in fact, it's not. And even within recycling, people more understanding on around mechanical recycling, for example, using waste paper, using waste bottle to fabrics, or using ocean plastics to make a product or make a bag. But if you only use waste materials to recycle materials or to make another waste product or to make another product, you cannot achieve full circularity as such. So for example, in our company at Covestro, we just launched a very new vision of being fully circular. And what we mean by that is to think from really the material perspective, right? How we can not just recycle materials, but to recover materials. By recovering materials, it could be via the mechanical recycling route that people are more familiar with, or it can be through chemical recycling, whereby you're not just recycle the materials per se, but break it down to the monomer level and use them as one of the raw materials. Or it can be through technologies like pyrolysis, where you use unrecyclable waste, unsorted waste that cannot be recycled, but turn them into fuel, turn them back to oil. Or it could also mean using non-fossil fuel resources. We are also looking into our upstream to try to see if there's any alternative resources that are not coming from fossil fuel. Can be from a bio-based material, can be from a waste-based material. So I think there's more element to circular economy than recycling in itself.
Though I agree with everything you said, something that is at top of mind is so much of what you said sounds like dollar figure. How does a company who has not even considered, has no infrastructure for reverse resources or has taken any steps, that sounds like a really long list and quite a steep ask for a company to kind of re-envision and reposition itself. What are some of the common challenges that you've seen, in your line of work and in your previous experience, as some of the main, I guess, concerns that a business might have when starting to transition in that space?
Yeah, good question. I think yes and no. I think it's happening right now. We are sort of hiding very upstream. So we look into the whole value chain. We're looking downstream, what's happening downstreams. For example, again, for our polycarbonate business units, one of the very active industries that we participate in is the electronics industries. And if you look into all these big electronics brands, right, the Dells, HPs, like all the other big companies right now, they are doing this kind of transformation to being more circular or more carbon neutral than before, right? And within those goals, they tend to break them down into different programs, initiatives. Some of them are material related. In the electronic case, they want to use more recyclable plastics. And if you just look into this one specific initiative, there are so many challenges already, right? We can recover certain materials from a recycled source, but there's a lot of limitation, right? You need to have a lot of good sorting. You need to have a lot of good cleaning, et cetera, along the recycling chain. But even if you perfect it, you can only achieve what? You can only use 100% recycled materials or 100% bio-based materials. It's not that possible for a laptop or for a car. So what happens is, if you want to use more recyclable materials, as an example, right? It all comes down to design, product design. Can you, designer, think of not just the use phase of the product, the performance, the cost, right? The manufacturing, the scalability, the likability from the consumers, but also consider the end of life. Would you consider how your laptop, your car, your phone, when it comes to the end of life management phase, how it's dismantled, how the materials are being sorted, can you bring all these criteria or considerations back into your design originally, so that your product can be better recycled, better sorted? Then from our material perspective, it's much more easier for us to transform those recycled materials to something more useful or as useful as before. So that's just one of the many challenges that I can think of.
Yeah, so really starting with design, if you start from a place of design and you're designing something that's inherently circular from the get-go, it should be much smoother sailing from there on in. I think design represents such a big response. I mean, there's so much responsibility placed on the design part of it. Martin, I want to turn to you. You have a background in policy, and now you're working, you're consulting in the circular economy space. Hemant mentioned, the importance of, many different parts of the system working together, collaboration. Where does policy come in? What should we be expecting or seeing or hoping for when it comes to the support from the policy side? Oh, we can't hear you. Hang on, Martin.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Oh, now we can hear you. Perfect.
Sorry about that. That's a really good point. A lot of people say collaboration is key in the circular economy, and that's true, because there's all these different kinds of models of cooperating with each other, using one person's waste as another person's input. There's like buy streams that are interesting for other business models. And there would also have to be a lot of data and information sharing to actually make the best use of all these material streams, product streams, shared services, and so on. Now, in our current system, that might be somewhat difficult, and companies and others might be quite unwilling or have like legitimate concerns about sharing all this information. So in order to create a framework where all of this is actually possible and works to the benefit of all companies, consumers, cities, societies, and so on, you would need a certain kind of regulatory framework that actually helps that and allows that. The basic thing is obviously pollution, CO2 materials has to be more expensive, but at the same time, you could also couple that with labor becoming cheaper, and thus actually making it much more valuable or much more economically beneficial to use less materials. It can't be that recycling in some cases is more expensive than actually virgin materials. That's a market failure. And I think for an example, the European Green Deal, where for example, in the European Commission has just come out with an increased CO2 reduction goal of 55% by 2030, which is part of the European Green Deal. Another part of it is the second Circular Economy Action Plan, and there's lots and lots of policies in there, given new standards, given new incentive structures, and also more rights to the consumer, that guarantee or the warranty, for example, for electronic products, should be longer than currently is the case. If you guarantee the product you buy can be used not only for 2 years, which already is the case in Europe right now, which is already an advantage towards other countries, I would say, but even longer, then that is an incentive to make products and services that are more valuable and that can be used for longer. And I haven't even started with the service side of it.
That's true. And I think if you did, I think there is a long list of incentives. But I'd love to dig in a little bit more into those incentives and maybe ask, Hemant, when you think of the types of collaborations that have come about in your line of work, where do you see the most incentives lying right now, in terms of economic incentives, in terms of just the pure aspect of, as Martin mentioned, somebody's waste is someone else's quote unquote food, what do those incentives look like? Can you speak to those a bit more?
I think the incentives are there, just that there is no proper system that actually allows those incentives to be captured. So, one of the best ways to actually create a strong incentive is to actually truly implement a polluter pays principle. And we still are struggling with that in the world. It's done partially, but it's still a long way to go. And Until we don't really do that, where is the incentive? At the moment, if you think about it, we live in a global village or a global ecosystem. So what gives someone a right to to produce, consume, and pollute, and so use resources, but also dispose them in a wrongful way, which basically harms, reduces my quality of life, reduces my life. So technically, there is no mechanism, robust mechanism in place in the world to stop you from doing that.
We're on something here, this idea of really breaking the link between economic growth and the use of natural resources. But that's a big link to break. I mean, we've been coupling those two things for so long. But studies have shown that if we were to break that, the circular economy would unlock $4.5 trillion of economic growth. That's not nothing. So I want to ask, I'll ask Martin, how would the adoption of the circular economy actually help in the economic recovery of this pandemic right now? I'm dreaming about the future. What would a new normal look like? And in terms of, decoupling growth from our planetary resources and building resilience, what could that look like if we dream for a second?
That's interesting. I've been dealing a lot with systems thinking in the last few years. People like Donella Meadows, who wrote, who's one of the main author of the first Limits to Growth, the report to the group of the Club of Rome report. But also more modern authors like Kate Raworth, who wrote the Donut Economics, for example, right? And I think, there's a lot of advantages, but one of the things that is specifically important in the times of crisis, like right now, is the increased resilience that a system like that would have. If, for example, product streams or material flows and maybe to some degree a sharing economy, reusing local production, also food and stuff like that, if that is more decentralized, and the supply chains are not only trimmed on hyper efficiency and delivery to order on a global scale, but are to some degree more localized and more flexible, and increase that resilience. And I think that would have a lot of advantages in food security, in economic security, and also in a certain kind of, let's call it neighborhood spirit in times of crisis, where people are already used to sharing and using things together. And it's funny because you see those kind of approaches always popping up in times of crisis, just by absolute necessity, because that is necessary to actually survive in some of the most hard-hit parts of society and hard-hit parts of the world. And then it almost people kind of forget about that again. But just to try to be optimistic, for example, in the European Green Deal, I think it's about 25% of those considerable funds, 750 billion euros, will have to be connected to sustainability backup measures. And I do think that if there is, and rightfully so, a lot of public money, taxpayer money available to actually help businesses and help society and help a lot of other people get back on their feet, I think it's very, very reasonable to try to spend that money in a way and attach conditions to it that create that kind of future that we all want. And by the way, a lot of businesses as well, there's a lot of businesses who have pushed the European Union and pushed the Commission to actually increase the standards to level the playing field. It's not against regulation. It's just let's have good rules for everybody so we can do what we want to do and are not unfairly treated. Correct?
So I specifically dreaming at the beginning of that question because part of me still thinks, okay, all of this sounds great. How much of this is theory and how much of this is practice, or will be practice? And so I want to throw this to both Roy and Hemant, actually. Hemant, from your perspective of working with business leaders, how are business leaders thinking about the decoupling of economic growth and natural resources? Because it seems like economic setbacks really need to be focused and addressed first before, the attention is given to sustainability concerns, though I wish it, didn't have to be that way. Is there a way to answer both at the same time? And before I let you answer that, I also want to link that to Roy to have you kind of think about it as well. From your perspective, how does a large company, you're one of the world's largest companies in this space. How does a company like that, of that size and that scale and that leadership, really think about that decoupling at this time in this pandemic? So I'll hand it over to Hemant first.
Business leaders, I think they have to grab this once in a lifetime opportunity, because the science is there and there is irrefutable evidence that resource conservation, environment protection, economic growth, business excellence, efficiencies go together. In fact, they support each other. So you cannot look at them in isolation. They're linked. As you rightly said, this is a $4.5 trillion a year opportunity. But then business leaders will have to take a responsibility to work, basically collaborate with the governments and the wider community to take circular economy out of boardrooms and conferences to the common man. And there is a huge challenge and also at the same time a huge opportunity here. But for that, there is a necessity for a solution broker, an honest solution broker, a robust platform which allows this various, elements to work together. So, government, industry, community, research and development, all this. And I think to some extent, we at the moment don't have that. We are trying to address that through CEAA, but also I'm very pleased to share this exciting development that we are actually in the process of establishing a global center of excellence on circular economy with a very specific focus on delivering on-ground tangible outcomes, but in a way where we collectively synergize the collective financial, economic, knowledge capital in the world to drive circular economy objectives. People like Ellen MacArthur Foundation, circular economy, they have done phenomenal work in thought leadership in really raising the agenda of circular economy. But I think we really need to find a way where there is a much better connect and collaboration.
In terms of connection, collaboration, turning it over to you, Roy, what any thoughts around what was said around that?
Yeah, I fully agree, right? Especially if you look at, I'll just look at it from top-down perspective, right? Our circular economy or circularity vision is driven by top-down, so the CEO. So I'm not the CEO, so if I'm wearing his hat, I think to have such an ambitious goal, vision, right, within the organization, right, part of it is a dream because it's a long-term thing, like you said, right? We cannot become fully circular next year, but it's a 20-year, 30-year game. However, I don't think it's purely from dream in terms of looking elsewhere, looking at our peers in the chemical industries, look at our downstreams, our customers, look at the environment, look at the regulations, right? It's happening. So then the question is how do you drive, right? I think your question was about like how do you drive circularity, how do you drive this circular economy model, especially for an organization like us. So that's this top-down element. And I think very soon after this launch of the vision, the KPIs will come in, right? The KPIs will come in for all the departments, right? My BU, the business unit that I'm in, would receive very soon like KPIs related to how we are going to achieve circularity. From the BU perspective, it would be, again, customer facing, right? What are the outside in demand to drive us also to come up with more solutions, material-wise, solution-wise, to address those. And then inside out will be what will be our R&Ds doing, right? They will focus more on the long-term thing. The recycling technologies that we're talking about, would there be any groundbreaking technologies that we can do or we can collaborate elsewhere, even though the demand is not there? So I think combined with this inside and outside approach, that's how the organization is shifting really to a more circular model.
So I want to speak to the fact that, I mean, you're here representing almost the commercial aspect. There is a commercial aspect to it. And I love this saying, you know, science isn't finished until it's communicated. So this idea that, you know, there is, yes, of course, shifting to circular falls on operations, on procurement, tech teams, sales, marketing. But there is a real aspect where you need to bring in the customer and you need to explain what circularity is about. How is that done? And are there any, you know, tips in terms of how to better communicate the shift towards a circular model that you could speak to?
Right, interesting question. So I personally finding a common language. If we start talking, again, we're very outsourced. We need to talk to our direct customers, who are the manufacturers or the ODMs, and then you have the OEMs, you have the brands, and then you have the consumers. One emerging theme for me to speak about circularity, a common language would be on carbon footprint. I think it's a more common language or currency right now. Talking about, for example, our new materials, our recycled materials, what's the carbon footprint directly contributing to our direct customers? What would their carbon footprint of the product directly contributing or communicating to the consumers? An emerging theme, I would say, or trend. And very soon, I think, in the material world, if you ask me, I think we will not just compete on the material performance, cost, but we will compete on the carbon footprint of the LCA, so to speak. I think this day will come. And then the next one, I think the translation would be, I actually wrote an article on LinkedIn with a pair of shoes that I bought from Nike, right? So if you know, Nike is having some of the new product series, L Vapor Max, Space Hippie, whereby they use recycled materials up to 75% or sometimes 50%. Not only they use recycled materials, but they speak from the design language. If you look at those shoes, even from a very far angle, from a very far distance, you can recognize them. This must have, you know, contain some of the recycled materials. So then I think it's also starting to have these big brands from design perspective using design language to talk to the consumers, so that the consumers, maybe they just buy these products not only because of the eco-friendliness, but because they like it, right? And that is a pretty good move, I believe, so that people can naturally like products that are coming from recycled materials, not just the, you know, environmental aware kind of consumers but buy these, but will be a major market with mass market. I think so. In a nutshell, I think the design language and the carbon footprint language was something that I could call like communication through the whole value chain.
Idea of using design as a Trojan horse to get people to rally around this topic and this issue. Like, why not make it beautiful? Why not make it click worthy and wearable or whatever it be? Yeah, that's a great point. I want to bring you mentioned so footprint, and I want to use that as a tangent for the next question before we open it up to all of you. If you have questions, be sure to write them in the chat. So the International Energy Agency believes that so far we've only reduced our global footprint by about 8% this year due to COVID-19. When I read that, I thought, wow, 8%, that's nothing. That's surprisingly little, despite all the air and road traffic halting for months on end. I'm in Canada right now, and it's still halted, and it just feels incredibly small. So I'm wondering, I want to ask this to all three of you. You know, what key tangible changes do you hope to see as we transition to a new normal, whenever that is, however that is, whatever that paradigm might be? So what are those changes? And also, how can the audience contribute to these changes, whether or not they are business owners, leaders, in policy, whoever is listening right now? What could they do to enact those changes? Whoever wants to go first.
You want me to go first?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, no worries. Look, it's a great question. And first of all, we have to realize that while we can look at this as a crisis, it's not also a great opportunity. And there's so many, again, good examples. It's proven. We going back 30 years. We did a program with UNEP, where we work with close to with the government of South Australia and UNEP. We work with close to 48 industries with the aim of looking at how they can improve their production processes, technology, their housekeeping practices, but with a focus on prevention. And it was called Cleaner Industries Demonstration Scheme. For every dollar, we did that project with 48 industries. For every dollar that was invested into the program, the return on investment was 33.2 times. Because of waste minimization, energy conservation, pollution prevention, water conservation, you name it, better product quality as well. There's so many opportunities which are out there. In fact, there are so many low-hanging fruits out there. If I have a wish list, there are three things I would really highlight, which really have to be looked at by everybody, by industry, by government, by policymakers. The first thing is we need to have this misconception removed that a tighter regulatory regime is actually bad for business. In fact, a good regulatory regime with clear goalposts is good for business. It is good because it actually forces them to become more efficient and more cost effective. The second principle, which I would like to say here, is that we have to focus on prevention and not end of the pipe. And if you look at the way all the regulatory regimes are structured around the world, we are still very end of the pipe focused, and we are never going to have enough resources, enough capital to deal with a problem when it has already occurred. It's just not going to happen. So that's the second point. And the third thing which I would say is that we really have to work hard on the polluter pays principle, because that is going to be providing a major incentive for the entire value chain to actually become more efficient. There was a webinar only last week actually, and the 2018 Nobel Prize winner for economics from Yale University, and he has actually he was very forthcoming in saying that we need to price carbon far better, and if we really want to make a change in the way we consume and manage and process and dispose our resources.
Yeah, it's kind of follow up, right? So just like what Hemant, the individual level, right? I think the whole COVID-19 experience for everyone as an individual is like a shock therapy in a way, that such pandemic or such epic can actually happen in our lives, and just as much as every other people, every other person, like observation, like what you mentioned, right? 8% of the global footprint was reduced. You can say, oh, this is very little, but then you can also say, wow, in history, in such short a time, we can also reduce such global footprint by a changing of our lifestyle, willingly or unwillingly. So then looking ahead for the post-COVID-19, I think people start realizing, oh, maybe that's a new way of life. Especially we were in a German company, so a lot of our European colleagues were not used to video calls, talking to a camera instead of a face-to-face meeting. But now they're getting used to it. So it's a new sort of discovery of something that is possible, changing a way of life. And for circular economy, it's the same thing, right? So if people believe it or not, if you want to live life in a more circular way, it's a major change of lifestyle, and you experience it just like everyone else during the COVID-19 situation. So I think positively it can be done. Of course, it has to be step by step, not as drastic as all of a sudden like the whole COVID-19 situation.
Yeah, I think like my two colleagues have already talked a lot about, like Hemant, a lot on the regulatory side. My background is also in public policy, so I think that's incredibly important. And then maybe also to add on what Roy is saying on the individual responsibility, because I think the question is about what people can do, right? So I think there's like two ways of going forward with that. One is there's a good argument to be made that the European legislation, which also, by the way, was fueled by the huge wave of election of all the Green parties in Europe just the year before. And that, again, was probably fueled, or was very likely fueled, by Greta and the Fridays for Future movement. So I think the power of actually going to the streets and making yourself heard also in groups and as voters is quite important. I think actually, although we're by far not where we have to be in the Paris Agreement and so on, I do think that the shift in perspective and putting that topic on the top of the agenda for voting in the European election was a huge achievement by Fridays for Future, whom I'm a big supporter of as well, although I'm probably not exactly their age group. As on an individual level, I would say literally put your money where your mouth is. So that could be food choices. That's a very good one. That could be travel choices, flying. And it could also be financial choices. So if you have the possibility, and you probably do, to have a look at where your retirement funds go or where you have your money invested, that is kind of a very hidden, very powerful lever because money talks. So at least, and it also can give you the feeling that at least your money is not going to causes that you don't enjoy. There's no point in not taking a plastic bag, but having invested into coal companies on the other side, right? So maybe think about where your own leverage is and where your money goes, both in your everyday choices as well as for later. And that would be a great way to go forward. And by the way, on my website, I try to I'm trying to build up this this selection of resources and trying to help to explain what are actions that you can be doing. There's a lot of other great initiatives here in Singapore as well, like Green is the New Black, for example, and they also as a group to just bigger and louder than it is by itself. But money talks.
Money talks. That's absolutely true. I want to head to some of the questions that are coming in, some brilliant questions from the audience that are leading in. It's great. Thematically, we're leading straight into those questions. I want to combine a couple questions. One from AJ, what are the common challenges business owners face when trying to integrate into the circular economy? What are causing these challenges? I mean, obviously we haven't, if it was so easy and so fantastic and such an opportunity, wouldn't everyone have already jumped on the bandwagon? And I almost want to, for sake of time, I want to kind of link that in with a question from Joseph. Quick question, what are some flaws or limitations to the circular economy, if any? So are there maybe flaws to or limitations that are causing business owners to hesitate the integration into that circular economy? I'll leave that open to, it wasn't directed to anyone particular.
Just a comment on that, actually, and I think maybe Roy and Martin could add. Business, I think one of the challenge I believe the business community has is that even the regulatory regime today is not giving them enough, I would say, really a good framework to focus on circular economy. It is still, as I said before, it is still a very regulatory command and control, end of the pipe focused kind of a regulatory regime, which doesn't really encourage businesses to look throughout their value chain and prevent and become more circular. That's the first point. Second, I think the issue I believe business community face is that a success of a business in delivering their circular economy objectives relies a lot on the wider community out there also doing the right thing. And again, there is a disconnect there. So in my view, that has to be dealt with.
From my side, I can think of, again, the linear economy versus circular economy within a company like ours, for example. Again, from a material perspective, a material company tends to be capital intensive, right, in terms of investments. So build mega plants, right, at scale, then we can drive the cost down. But for circular economy, it could, jeopardize our, right? So it's the shift of the KPI, so to say, to disrupt ourselves or getting somebody else disrupt us. So I think, again, so top-down leadership-wise, if you can have that vision before you get disrupted, you better start transforming. Then that's the first step. The second step will be a lot of conflicts internally about, KPIs, incentives. And we can solve it, I think, hopefully, by, again, looking from the business unit perspective, by looking at new business opportunities, right? It doesn't mean that we can only make profit out of a mega plant with tens of billions of dollars on infrastructure. Also do it in other ways, and in a circular economy, I think whatever model it is, this will be a completely different model. Then again, we either do it ourselves, or I believe we need to work with, just like what the other two speakers also showed, before we get, either disrupted, outsider, or population.
That's right.
Disrupted, absolutely.
I'm actually quite interested in what my colleague Roy has to say about that. Like, circular economy, maybe one of the negative parts of it, or one of the, I won't say weaknesses, but since, like, for example, in Germany, the circular economy, the German term Kreislaufwirtschaft, came very much from the waste management perspective. And that's as good a place to start than others. But if you go at it from the waste management perspective, then you talk about recyclability of materials. You want to take everything apart, and you still use a lot of value. If you think about value, that's like recycling is like relatively low value in comparison to other more creative ideas on the design stage in sharing products and having a second-hand market in using the same, not the same materials to make new products, but maybe reusing the product itself or making the product a service. I'm just interested in what my colleague from a materials company, what the perspective is on that, because I think material is still lower value in the value chain than a product, but do you work on that as well, or is your focus mainly on making materials reusable? There's like a lot of room upwards from the material stage, is there not?
Yeah, I briefly talked about not just recycled materials being reused as one of our focuses, right? We also talked about a little bit on chemical recycling and non-fossil based raw materials that can unlock some of the values down the value chain. But interesting, even within recycling, right? We talked about jeopardizing our core business. If you use more recycled materials, you use less virgin materials. But that's okay, because aside, from material perspective, you want your material to be applied to the right application, to the right product, as many products as possible. If you can achieve your performance just as the same as you can achieve your performance with the recycled materials, virgin materials, then why not just recycle? Leave those applications that you cannot achieve with recycled materials, be it with virgin materials, and maybe we can get more value from that from a virgin perspective. So that, to me, sounds like it's jeopardizing recycle between recycling and virgin plastics, but in fact, it's not.
It's interesting. We're bringing up a lot of ideas around jeopardizing industries or jeopardizing yourself even as a company. I think that's really interesting. We have to wrap up. We have more questions coming in. Thank you for all of your questions. Unfortunately, we have to close. But just some final thoughts. If any of you have Martin, Hemant, Roy, if you have any final thoughts you do want to share, this has been such a fruitful discussion for me. I really appreciate all of your time.
I think a comment I would like to make here is simple, that we should look at circular economy basically as a social re-engineering project. It is not just about product, services, or systems. It is about human beings, about the community out there, because they finally decide how successful your programs are. And so it has to be looked at holistically, and any program that considers these multiple perspectives of community, regulators, industry, business, technology, and market instruments would be successful. And I think, another comment I would like to make is that, yes, you could argue that capitalism has contributed to the situation that we currently are in. But again, we need to look at good elements of capitalism to solve and deal with the problem as well.
Yeah, I think it would be really, I think like we need good stories. I think we need like a good idea of what we think is a future worth living. For example, I did a workshop on future cities here in Singapore a year ago, and people were like building their own cities and with like all kinds of materials, like in kindergarten, but with professionals, right? And that was really fun. But then, and then we looked at the different ideas of the cities. Some things might even have looked a little bit like Gardens by the Bay. And then afterwards, like, but I also asked them, so what will people do, right? What kind of jobs will you have? What will life look like? How will your life in the city change? And afterwards, a participant came to me and said, you know what, it's really interesting. I thought of future cities. I always thought of the buildings and the infrastructure. I never really thought about what would be the jobs and the people and what would. I think thinking about what we want, not only us, but also the next generation, our kids, our family, our friends, and the next generation, the young people now, what kind of world they should have, or what kind of world we will be moving towards. Probably not towards like what is happening in California right now, or what is happening in the world with the situation, coming back to why we're moving here. I think it would be really helpful to see, okay, this is what we want and how to get there. And maybe I'm actually very positive that circular economy is one of the success stories on the path towards the future that we want, which is in many ways not exactly where we are right now.
Envisioning.
I'll just add a couple of words from my side. I'll just steal from what her opening remarks, right? Collaboration is the key word. I mean, we really cannot achieve the model alone. And there's so much to explore. Talking to anybody that is not in your comfort zone, right? There's actually more collaboration needed in circular economy than linear about the recycling. Because you need to think about the municipalities, the infrastructures. Then a lot of people that you need to talk to, not just from a material perspective.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts. I want to give a big thank you to all three of you for giving this really well-rounded discussion, and to everyone listening, thank you for your questions. Thank you for being a great audience. And let's continue this collaborative approach. Let's make it a point for all of us in whatever industries we're in, wherever we sit in the world, to make a point of bringing that forward. Thank you for all your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.